Great. So you have already introduced the speakers here. So, I mean, my time is saved. I'll save those 5 minutes for myself. My name is Ankur, and this panel is very special to me. Just before, in the last couple of days, I've been talking to all four of them to understand what queer parenting means to them, how they have been doing it, what are the challenges, joys, concerns of being a queer parent. Being a queer parent is also a political identity. Doesn't matter where you live in the world. In some parts of the world, it could be, you could assert it. And in some parts of the world, asserting it could invite violence. So because, I mean, my panel here represents different kind of family constellations. They come from different parts of the world. So I think it's also an opportunity for us to really understand where the conversation is at about queer parenting in the world. What are we thinking about? How are we raising kids? How are we thinking of families? Rethinking its structure in the way we are raising kids. All of that I'm trying to gather from my fabulous speakers. So I had written down your introductions, but I guess I probably won't because the person has already introduced. So, Patruni, I want to sort of start with you. You are a new queer parent. Your kid is just about a year and a half old, yeah. Right? So, when you found out that you are going to be a parent, what were your first thoughts, worries, concerns, moment of joy? I mean, I'm asking this quintessential "aapko kaisa laga" reporting question only because it's not easy to be a queer parent, especially in India. So just tell us about that.
Great. So hi everyone. Oh, their coffee is there. Hi everyone. Yeah, we need that energy. There's a drag queen in the room, so please.
Good, you're doing my job.
So hi, my name is Patruni, and coming back to the question, I have 1-year-old kid. It's a biological kid, and I'm not straight, to make it clear. I'm a bisexual, trans, non-binary person, married to a cisgender woman. And the very first time to kind of start with the idea of parenting, I had a very lot of questions, like how would I deal with the very thought of being a parent? Which gender role will I choose? What is the label which I need to? And then after a certain point in time, my partner wanted kids for always. And I thought, this is something which is, again, a mutual conversation which we need to have. So we never wanted to plan a certain thing, just like my drag performances. We don't want to kind of think about, okay, this is a time, this is a space, this is a situation. And we wanted to kind of go ahead with the flow. And the flow was very fast, actually. So it's in just 2 years of my marriage, my partner, and I, broke the bubble, saying that, okay, I'm conceiving. One of the biggest fear was I was still being very out as a trans person, and I'm very visible as well within my community and within my city. And I was being bullied when I was a kid, when I was very young in my school as well as in college. So what I was thinking of is this might also be triggered to my kid, especially because of me, my persona, or my external activities which I do. And that was the most fearful thing which I could ever imagine about. While I was trying to process, while I was trying to recollect, I was trying to look out for examples who are there across in the, in the society, who are queer and who are trying to raise. And, I was not able to kind of be aware about queer parents. I haven't, immediately been able to access somebody who was a parent as well as raising. But it's just my lack of, stepping out of the house and looking across. And eventually, when I got to see there are parents who are raising kids, there are trans women who are raising, biological kids. There are, clusters of women, single women who are kind of raising kids. So I thought it's something which I should do it. And to challenge the fear of how exactly the schools or the colleges might be making hard times for not only kids but also for kids of queer parent. It's also an onus which we all have, and this is also an ask for all the people who are listening to this. Let's together we make these schools possible. Let's together create a space where we can ensure that my child is safe. So I think I'm still trying to navigate that process.
Right. David, I want to move to you now. You have two boys.
Two boys. Yeah.
Yes. And you were sort of raising them in the 90s UK. What was it like to raise kids as a single gay dad at that time? What was that time like? What was happening in the UK at that time? And also from that, I want to learn, is there something different about queer parenting? People seem to think that if you are a queer parent, maybe you would be doing it slightly differently or not, or maybe it's all the same. What was it like?
So I was used to being a minority because I'm adopted and I was questioning my sexuality. So I had that feeling of being a minority. So when my wife and I had our first child, we decided because of financial reasons that I would be the stay-at-home dad, which in the 90s in the UK was quite unusual. I mean, I was the only dad and baby at any mother and toddler club. But because I had this feeling of being used to being in a minority, it didn't really bother me so much. Until on one occasion, my homeopathic counsellor came along to one session of the Mother and Baby Club, and I was absolutely horrified because my two worlds, my two separate worlds of my sexuality, because I knew I was having an issue with my sexuality, but also being married and in that sort of heteronormal world. And at that point, my then wife didn't really have much of an idea of what I was going through. I was very good at hiding this as a gay man and a gay child. Growing up, we learned to hide and present a different facade that people accept. And so when I turn up to the baby and toddler, baby and mother club as the only dad, they obviously assume that I'm heterosexual and I've got a wife at home and all that. But seeing my counsellor there, who was there to give a talk, suddenly these two worlds collided. And it was quite a traumatic feeling inside me that although I'd worked very hard and made a good job of keeping these two worlds separate, suddenly they were in the same room. And I, over time I had to come to terms with being a gay person. And the story goes that my wife found out, and we had a long discussion about this, and of course it was very traumatic for both of us. We separated but stayed in the same home, so again, to the outside world, we were presenting as a heteronormative couple. And the schools never knew that I was a gay man, but that I was the stay-at-home dad. So parenting for me was all about parenting. It wasn't about me. And I think that's, as you say, that's your main concern is for the child and what society will put on that child. So you want to keep them safe. And so my way of keeping my children safe was to stay in the closet and present a heteronormative persona to people. Bringing up my children was about parenting, which those who have children will understand. You just get on with and do. We had a discussion last night about changing nappies. It doesn't matter what your sexuality is. If you're changing a nappy, it's changing a nappy. So the question of parenting, I think once you come out and you have that discussion with your children, I mean, mine are both grown up now and are very supportive, thankfully, and they live in a society that's totally different and talks about these issues to the society that I grew up in that was this the discussions earlier about colonialism. So I apologise on behalf of the British nation that we put this upon so many countries, and you know, but we are dealing with it as much as anybody really, colonialism and that. But the point is that parenting, I think, is you do your best for your children.
Right. So building on your thoughts, Vikram, I want to move to you now. So what sort of David is saying that it isn't quite different. What you're trying to do is just create a safe world for the baby. And there's this research that we talked about the other day that sort of tells that being a queer parent is not very different from how a heterosexual people or a single gay dad might raise, or a single mom might raise their kids, and that the kids kind of don't turn out to be any better or worse for that matter. But you have also been engaging with a different question for quite some time in your research, that there is, if you're a queer parent or the family constellation that you have created, which could resemble a different kind in its own way, there is potential to in some ways enrich parenting, provide a different model, in some ways you said even improve it. So can you offer some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so maybe first just to kind of summarize, because there's loads, I'm a professor of psychotherapy, so I've been very interested in kind of the, several aspects of parenting. And when it comes to queer parenting, there's been research since the 70s. And it kind of started because lesbians their children were taken away from them because it was in the child's best interest to not be with a lesbian mother, right? So Susan Golombok is a British researcher. She's done research since the 70s, vast amounts of research on queer families. And the result is very clear, and I think it needs to be said out loud also, in an Indian context, that the family form does not matter at all. The family structure, the family form does not matter. What matters is warmth, love, and the stability of kind of the people involved. So I think that is very important. But for me, it's also kind of a negative starting point just to say that, the children of queer families, they don't come out any better or worse than from straight families. I'm just like, well, I think queerness can also be enriching. So that's been a little bit my perspective, like how does queerness to me enrich my parenting? And I think in several ways, because queerness for me, of course, is about gender, sexuality, relationship forms. So I try to be a little bit conscious of, and this is also something research shows, like queer parents generally are better with their children when it comes to gender norms. So allowing for my child, who I normally talk of as a he, sometimes I'll say they, just to not gender it so much, for somewhat of a kind of gender creative parenting style. Like, you can wear a skirt, you can wear a tutu, you can wear this firefighter outfit, different colors, It's so funny, I think, when people are like, oh, they can't inherit from, our children because it's a boy. I'm like, of course, like, we'll wear anything. It's fun. So that's just like one small example of like questioning the gender norms, this socialization starts so early, like already they're talking about, this is a man. And I'll be like, well, because I was shaving the other day and they were like, oh, Papa man. And I was like, are you thinking about my beard? I'm like, some women also have beards and, they're also trans people. And when I was like, let's go and look at this book. Because luckily there are more and more books as well in this field for children. So I was like, look, all these different people, different gender identities, etc. But apart from kind of gender and sexuality, queerness for me is also about kind of, questioning norms and dominant norms more generally. I think it was here in the previous panel about, all these binaries like nature, culture, humans, other than humans. So for me, like a lot of children actually, and again, this is research, shows that when we're very young, we say hello to the trees. At some point around the years, like maybe 6, 7 years old, especially in the West, you stop saying hello to the tree. That's considered childish, or like then you're not like, an adult. But I'll be like, we always say hello to the trees. When we enter the forest, we ask for permission if we may enter. when we leave the forest, we always stop and say, thank you and bye-bye to the forest. So for me, queerness is about many things, questioning several of these kind of more dominant norms and ways of being in the world, with humans and other than humans.
Thanks for that, Vikram. Sindhu, now I want to move to you and move to stereotypes, actually. There are quite a few, actually many, stereotypes about queer people in our society and actually every part of the world. And one stereotype that I sort of remember and often see is this over-sexualized image of queer people that media presents. And when you become a parent, I mean, these labels, perceptions sort of like are still on you, or society is thinking of you still that way. For example, they may think that, I don't know if queer people are doing parenting right, their kids are running wild and all of that. So have you thought about these stereotypes and have, in your social conversations with people, have these questions come up? So break some myths here.
Thanks for that, Ankur. I think we had a chat about this earlier as well. So I've primarily raised my daughter, who's now 8 years old, in the UK and in Canada. And the stereotypes obviously exist. So I'm a very out queer person. It's not like I'm hiding my sexuality at all. I'd go out and I come out with everybody, like with parents and stuff. So there is this myth that, queer people are hypersexualized. Like, people think we're having orgies at home all the time, or like parties at home all the time. It's not the case. Like, we have things to do. It's like other things to do. So it's like, you're also thinking like when, with children, you have to set up play dates and all of that. And then when people are sending their kids over to your house as a queer parent, you got to make them feel like, so then you'll know who is sort of your ally and who isn't. Like, people are like, okay, what's going on here, right? I'm like any South Asian parent, right? I just want my daughter to do her homework, go to bed on time, get good grades, all of those sorts of things. So it's not like, and as you said, I'm breaking all those things for my child as she's growing up. I think one of the things, I like to think of myself as a cool queer auntie. So, all the other kids who come to my house, they have no gender norms. Like, they have to, so the boys can come over and wear the girl clothes, whatever, I don't care. So I'm cool that way. Maybe the other parents are like, okay, if she goes there, she might convert my kids, like whatever. Maybe that's true, but to an extent. But I think it's a good thing that, I think kids feel safe coming to our house because I'm not imposing anything like you're a boy, you do this, you're a girl, you do this, or like you can't play those games. Or, I have no such. So I think queer parents are cool. So, yeah.
Great. And now moving back to you, Vikram, again, and I'm changing gears a little bit here, moving to a wider conversation of the rise of anti-gender movement, the pro-family movement that's sort of spreading across the world, and how the money is moving. The movement is pretty organized, and it's really playing out in schools with the ban on or restriction on comprehensive sexuality education, the conversations around drag, being non-binary, all of that. So how are you engaging with these questions? And in Norway, how is the conversation playing out, and does that worry you?
Yeah, so maybe I can return to some of this research overall first, because what the research does show when it comes to queer parents is that we have to suffer the extra stigma, and that our children have to suffer the extra stigma. So that does matter, actually, to our children's mental health as well. And I think it's, in Norway, there's a lot of like nurseries and schools, they celebrate Pride. They'll have their flags up and everything. At our nursery, they know, like they're very accepting, and they know that our child has 2 dads and 1 mother, so we do a co-parenting arrangement. But during some prides now, what happens is it's become very divisive. So during Pride, some parents will take their children out of the nursery and the schools, keep them away. Some parents have even done like sort of demonstrations outside of the primary schools and nurseries, and talking about the child's best interests. I'm like, what about the children who come from queer families? Like, how will they feel with these like quite violent protests going on? And recently, I was at this, I was at a party, and someone was talking about how this organization in Norway, queer organization in Norway now has introduced separate bathrooms in the nurseries, in all nurseries, so that the children can go there to masturbate and they will be helped by one of the staff. And I'm like, what? So this is apparently a conspiracy that's spreading. And I've heard it from several people now. And people believe it, like this really old-fashioned equating like homosexuality and queerness with pedophilia. So this anti-pride, anti-gender movement is really, there's quite a bit of a backlash happening in Norway. So that is, of course, something I am worried about as a queer parent for my child. How will this child grow up in the world, which still, puts a lot of stigma on queer families? So hopefully I can contribute by making our child more resilient in different ways, but also I do hope that we need to change society. Wider society needs to change as well. Yeah.
Right. Just staying with you a little more, Vikram. So how are you thinking about doing this? I mean, does it mean that more queer families needs to organize, and because that anti-gender is a more organized movement? So how do we really respond to that? Just a couple more thoughts on that, if you have thought about it.
Well, I think there are many different ways that we can respond. I think one thing is, like for example now, one good thing about the internet and online communities is like we can always find each other, right? So there is a forum called Rainbow Families that we're part of in Norway, me, my husband, and yeah. So we meet other queer families, and just for our child also to see that they're not alone. They, like other people, also have 2 dads, 2 mothers, 3, 4, 5, whatever, like different family constellations, to feel that they're not, they don't. We belong to a community as well. I think that is quite important to have that sense of a community. And then engaging, I think, talking like I'm open with the staff at the nursery. I talk to them about these things. I wonder about how they will celebrate Pride. So just engaging, I think, is quite important. But it's getting very divisive. And I think, with certain people, it will not always help to talk. It becomes a very, it's a difficult question, I think. I think it is difficult. But I think for us to kind of support ourselves and to continue, being a minority, sometimes that's also how wider social change happens, like the anti-slave movement, in the UK, for example. It was a tiny, tiny group that was actually fighting. So I think for us as well, if we build some resilience, if we support each other, have a community, and of course allies, then I think something can happen over the course of many years. But it is not an easy question. I think with all change, there will also be resistance. And we're seeing a lot of that now in the West.
Right. Patruni, I want to bring you into the conversation now. The other day we were talking about how the visibility itself is quite important, and like Vikram was saying about visibility of different kinds of family constellations as they become more and more visible and we have more allies, probably that in itself can drive some change. But going back to the anti-gender and anti-drag movement that's also taking hold gradually, what are your thoughts on that in relation to queer parenting? You do drag. How does that affect your own thought process, or will you be able to do this in future? How your child will engage with this? How will you have these conversations? And I have a second part to this question, is that in the middle of all of this, how are you creating moments of joy, playfulness, queerness in your family or in the life of your child?
Great. So that's a heavy load. Thank you. To start with, I think, I became parent at the right time when the entire globalization or global conversations happening about drag artists. And for me, when I wanted to kind of step into, the news every time my partner was pregnant, and I open any kind of a news channel, there is a drag ban over here, children need to be saved by, people, etc. So those were the news which were being popping up. And somewhere or the other way, I was trying to reanalyze that, I think this might be a space which is trying to reaffirm that whatever I'm doing is correct. And I think the problem what lies to kind of see how children with drag is people assume that drag is always sexual. It's always something which kind of presents something which is in a very sexual and oblivious manner, but it's not. There are other ways of kind of going ahead and seeing drag in itself. Like, drag artists are the core of any kind of a community, and they have been existing for years now. Now, if a drag artist performing at a club is a problem, then there should be problem with item numbers happening in Bollywood. There should be problems with things which are being shown on the name of body alterations. There should be problem with how cis het conversations are being portrayed and kind of glued to the idea of screens, with songs which are being played on women and how exactly they are being demonized, etc. So I think drag has never been a problem. The problem was with the mindset of people. Now, when I try to introspect myself, when I try to think about will my drag become a space for my child to kind of get targeted, or will my visibility as a drag artist kind of affect my child? So those were the spaces where I wanted to kind of get back and say that I might not be able to present this, I might not be able to continue this. But over this entire context, one person who stood next to me was my partner. And my partner just, they were always pushing me back and saying that, you do you and I do me. And this was this is always a situation where I kind of rely on my partner extremely, because there is also a biological need for the child with the mother. And me being me in that particular cluster of a family helped me reanalyze and define my own journey as a parent. I don't want to kind of being dictated by the world telling that, okay, parents should be just like this, black or white. And I don't want to be dictated by the world that, drag is always sexual. And when I try to kind of blend or kind of uncheck both of them, and I say that, okay, why can't I do something which is child-friendly? Or why can't I do something which is, which kind of proves a better way of me being existing as a drag artist, as well as having a kid and living in a family. So those parallel grounds were the ones which I'm trying to kind of learn and walk in. And with the US ban or with how exactly drag has been portrayed as a very anti-art form for many, we have been having drag in India for 100 centuries now. I saw when I was a 5-year-old kid, a man dressed up as a woman and perform in Kuchipudi. I saw when I was a 5-year-old kid, there is a street play which is happening where there's a person who's doing a launda nach right in front of the entire public, which includes women, men, and the boys and the girls, everybody together. So if these examples are existing, why are we just kind of countering just a certain art form just because it has an English name? So I think those were some of the questions which I was trying to ask. And eventually what happened was I was getting trolled. I was, a lot of the times where people went back and said, oh, take off the child with this family. This is not something which the child should be going through. And I usually create content where my child is also present. And there were times where people kind of howl back and they tag people and they say that, okay, take off the child, break the family. My partner is a person who doesn't understand what I'm doing, or there might be a dowry, hence she married me, etc., etc. So these are the things when I see it online, it definitely affects as an individual. Having said that, when I see the smile of my child when I'm like this, coming and walking towards me, I think that joy has nothing to do with the hate which I get. So I think I find those kind of spaces to kind of rejuvenate myself and my experience. And my child is also somebody who has been having a very open ground. So this particular wig last night, they were just wearing this wig, playing with it and kind of roaming around around the house. My makeup has always been kind of, I would say, used like, sometimes on the face, sometimes on somebody else, sometimes on their bum, wherever they want. And safeguarding my makeup safeguarding my elements is something which is always a very tough thing to do with a child. But those are some of the moments where I cherish, where I think that, okay, these are some things which I could have only experienced being a drag artist. And I'm never going to stop drag. Rather, I would ensure that I'm having both the fields together and walk together.
Great. Very well put. So in some ways, your makeup has become a playground for your child and something that you were forbidden from. So I think there is some movement there. David, moving the conversation to solutions, if possible, and change making. Do you think queer people who choose to be parents, and I mean parenting in the most expensive, diverse ways here, do we have a role to play in building a more inclusive and safer world for all kids? Or we shouldn't have this kind of unnecessary extra expectation of queer people?
Well, I'm certainly not going to give a solution to such a huge question, but I think when I think back 10, 15, 20 years, 40 years, these conversations were not being had. So the fact that we are here having this conversation and we keep having these conversations is the way forward. And visibility and normalizing all our stories is what brings the audience in, brings society in. People reject something with anger and fear because they don't understand it. And when we present ourselves as our authentic selves, I have since learnt, people are engaged and encompassing and human and present kindness generally, and the ones who don't fall by the wayside and will find another issue to get their teeth into. We've had conversations about the animosity towards the trans community, especially in the US, but also in the UK. And this really comes about because the gay community, the LGBTQ plus community, is more visible and more talked about and more, represented. When I was growing up, there was absolutely no representation of any of these, labels or letters that we give ourselves or don't give ourselves, whatever. But I think the way forward is for these events and others, and to keep having the conversation. Does that answer your question? It's certainly not a solution. But,
No. That definitely helps, yeah. Sindhu, I give you the last word. Same question to you, actually. Being a queer parent is, as we sort of have talked about earlier, is a political identity, has been a political identity. So what do you think queer parents are doing or can do in expanding society's understanding of building family, building relationship? Because so much of parenting is about how relationships should be, expanding their meaning. And how are you thinking of these questions as a queer parent, and how do we move this conversation forward?
I could answer this as a queer feminist theorist, but I will refrain from that. So I think the important thing is to democratize gender and sexuality. And that's the crux of what it means to me to be a queer parent, for my own child and for her friends and kids in my family and in my community. I think it's so important for children to grow up knowing that their truth is valid, whoever they feel like they can be, and it's fine. They do not have to worry about what somebody else says, even if somebody bullies them or whatever. It does not matter. Your identity is important. Your truth is important to you. So those are the values that I think, as a queer parent, that I really want to instill in my child and all the children who I engage with. And the most beautiful thing about being a parent, it's not just your child. You interact with so many other children as your kids grow up. You meet so many other children. And having all these children in my life, and for them to know who I am, my sexuality and my identity, and for them to just be part of my life, and for them to know that it's okay for you to be however. And I also wanted to say one more thing, is that it's not only a relationship with another person as a queer parent, it's also with yourself. So Patruni spoke about it, and for me too, I'm very andro-femme. So some years I'm very masculine, some years I'm super feminine, some years I'm like a garbage bag, So it's like my daughter's had to see me go through all of this all through, and she's 8 now, and it's her normal. So she would sometimes come tell me, Mama, you're not like other mamas. You're not like baking and wearing pretty dresses or whatever. But that's her normal now. And I think all the kids who've grown up with us, that's our normal. So I think democratizing gender and sexuality.
Democratizing gender and sexuality. We'll end it there. I want to move to questions from audiences, but Vikram said that he has a 3-line poem that he wants to recite. So Vikram, go ahead, and then we move to audience questions.
Okay, thank you, Ankur. Yeah, and I think it fits a little bit with also maybe possible, like you ask for solutions or the way forward. And since we're at a queer literature festival, I'm thinking about creativity. And I think for everyone who's been in touch with children in one way or the other, you can see the creativity there, right? They're not already socialized into all these concepts. This is that, you know? There's a creative outlook, which is very hopeful, I think. So we can also learn from our children. So this poem is a very brief poem. I'll just say it first, and then I'll say something about it. So it goes like this. This solid white thing, baby and I drum and dance, till Papa Da says, I need to use the toilet. So it's the European toilets kind of poem. And it's, you know, based on the fact that the toilet seat became like, it's not just a toilet. Like, we were in the bathroom, like, baby was like starting to drum on this seat. And I was like, oh yeah, cool. I started to dance, and then we're having a little dance party there. So I think that kind of way of looking at things, like, you know, and then it became a poem, right? So this like creative process. I really do believe that not just that artists can save the world, right? But there is something about the creative way of looking at things, and I think that is also very related to the queer things, of a queer way of looking at things, that we can also learn from very, very young children. Yeah. So thank you for letting me do the 3-line poem.
Of course, yeah. Moving to audience questions now. Any questions? There's one. Do we have a mic? Okay, yeah.
Hi. This is for anybody on the panel, especially David, because I think you said your boys are a little older than the other children. I want to know that, you know, are we assuming that because we are queer parents, our kids will necessarily grow up to be allies? Because they are part of the mainstream world, and it doesn't, you know, it goes without saying that they are most probably not going to be queer and share our queerness. So how do we prevent them from being judgmental about us? From what all of you said, it seems that, you know, that we assume that they will be allies. But it could be that as they grow up, they will be alienated from us and think of us as strange and even freakish. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, thank you for your question. That's a really poignant question to answer. I mean, I've been very lucky. Both my boys are grown up. The eldest is 27, the youngest is 22. But when I told them, they were in their teens, and they were both very shocked, I guess, but supportive. They loved their dad, and that was the main thing that came through, the love. And obviously, I love them. So it was about our relationship as a father and sons. My youngest son, he's very supportive, but he still has difficulty with engaging with my gay story, if you like. He comes along to events and podcasts and things, but he had an experience with an ex-girlfriend who thought it was very cool that her boyfriend had a gay dad, and she wanted to listen to the podcasts and was very vocal about telling him what I had said in those podcasts. And although he's supportive, he didn't really want to listen to someone else tell him about his dad, because he sees his dad as, I guess, someone separate to this character who goes around on podcasts and attends festivals like this and talks about his life, my life. So to answer your question, I think it's about continuing that father-son relationship and building on that. And if they don't engage with your sexuality, then that's for them to decide. But whatever happens, you have to carry on being the parent and being the loving father. I guess that's the answer.
Thanks. That's a really comprehensive answer. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Do you have any other question? There is one more over there.
This is a really interesting thing for me. I am a parent of a queer child. Has anyone faced any of the situation where the child from the school, he told something about the parents and there was something very good that happened? I mean, it was a very proud moment for you. Or maybe on the other hand, it can be a very disappointing moment for you because of the child who is in the school. Has anything happened with any of you?
Any if you want to take that question, any example?
Yeah, so small event. So our child is still a toddler in nursery. And apparently at nursery, the big thing is like, they keep going like, my dad, no, my dad, or my mother. And then at some point, he was saying something, and then the nursery teacher says, yes, because Lucan actually has 2 papas and 1 mama. And the other children were just like, wow, like 2 papas and 1 mama. So far, all good.
I think we had one more question. Do you want to ask? And after that, we'll wrap up, I guess, yeah.
So whenever we often talk about like parents that are being, let's say, more progressive, etc., there is always this traditionalistic opposition that a child needs a motherly figure and a fatherly figure. So often those parents have this need to emulate those heteronormative ideals in a relationships of being a mother or of being a father, despite being same-sex themselves in many situations. So I think like when we talk about like democratization of gender roles associated with parenting, it is something which is, again, not much accessible to so many cultures or communities because they too still seek for external validation of the society to fit, to live safely, to still present the motherly or the fatherly or like the traditional order. So my question to the panelists, like, where do we stand in the scope of democratizing those gender roles across the cultures, away from the esoteric circles and amongst like everyone? Because I think like awareness is also not equitable for everyone currently.
I can answer this. This is I'm a parent from India. I've been trying to kind of figure out my way within the space itself, and the entire idea of I've been reading a lot about gender-neutral parenting, and I think it's a very cool thing. There were sessions in my corporate office where they basically bought somebody who doesn't even understand what the perspective of gender is, talk and teach me about how exactly I should raise a child by using only words which are non-gendered in so nature. So somewhere or the other way, if I'm doing that kind of a process, I'm not even giving them the words about, I'm not educating them enough to see and visualize the different perspectives of gender in itself. And this entire ham of, a specific way of parenting is something which has been thrown to people, and we try to kind of tend and figure it out, how can we kind of imply it within our own societal fabric. Especially if I'm raising a kid in a very gender-neutral way at this point in time in India, the time when they kind of go to a school, they won't even understand, they would think that it's a very different nature altogether. There would be a culture shock for them. So for me, I think I don't usually kind of go ahead with the concept of gender-neutral parenting to be starting with. Having said that, as I said, we already have a lot of queer parents across our societies. I know somebody who is a trans-hijra woman raising their own cisgender kid in a space which is filled with a lot of other trans women. So when they raise those kids, they are exposed to multiple natures of the society, and we don't have to teach parenting to somebody. Rather, we just experience it as and when we kind of go with the flow and analyze what exactly and where exactly we are being placing the idea of parenting in itself. For example, what I'm trying to understand is like I would not assume that my kid would be genderless since they kind of come to a certain age. Because if I raise them as genderless and the society calls it as a boy, again, I don't want to instill the idea of confusion right from the beginning. I see as and when I kind of take it. I and my partner has this, idea like, I would see how I want to see my child. I might be seeing them genderless. My partner would see them as they want to see. That might be a cisgender child. And this is the two options which we want to provide it to the kid, so that at one point in time when they realize that, okay, this is the right age and I want to pick one side, I can easily choose. So giving the options is something which is a very better way of kind of doing it, and exposing to the nuances of the society, like taking them through the fabrics of how exactly humanity functions. Taking your child to a place where you would see multiple people across from multiple aspects of it, and that eventually kind of goes ahead and educates the child in a more natural way than preaching and kind of designing, okay, this is how I want to parent my kid. So I think that is one of the ways how non spaces which are not accessible to the words of gender neutral parenting should kind of do it, and they have been doing it. It's just that we have woken up a little late and we assume that it's not happening. It has already been happening in the society. There are already people who are kind of taking it forward. Yeah.
Right. That's really beautifully put, Patruni. I want to close this, but Sindhu, do you have a closing thought on the democratizing it?
No, I think what
Okay. Do we have time or we close it? Let's close. I mean, all of them are here. You can catch them moving around here. It was a really lovely panel. I learned a lot. I think it was a useful conversation for all of us. Let's close it here. Thank you so much for coming.